Welcome back to Explain Through Rap, the channel you love that explains cool facts. Thank you for your comment. You're the greatest. If you comment a request, I'll try to make it. The thing with economic stuff is prices keep rising, it's proper rough. Income and prices in the past were dirty cheap. In 1970 a cinema ticket was 30p. Only 30 pence, that's sick, G sound. I watched Bond last night for £15. Why does the same thing cost more later in time? Inflation is the raise of raising the price for goods and services in an economy. Over a set time period, it's honestly a drag, because when prices of goods are more, each unit of currency has less purchasing power than before. So less goods and services can be bought. The value of your currency goes through the floor. Inflation in US is tracked using the Consumer Price Index. They price thousands of goods. It's blessed. The CPI helps us understand changes in prices of goods with a yearly percentage to type in our books. If the CPI is 3% and on average here you know, then prices are 3% more than a year ago. Or in other terms, you need to spend 3% more of your currency for everything that you bought. There's also deflation when prices decrease. This means more goods than we likely will need, or there's more goods available for buying than the amount of money circulating to buy them. Deflation usually increases the likelihood of a recession, so it's not as good as it sounds. It needs checking. The reasons for inflation are myriad. Let's focus more on three. Firstly, if governments print more money. Governments like doing this to boost their economy, to create more jobs is why they do this. Probably money is put into circulation by literally printing more or increasing government debt, which is pretty poor. An example of printing more money happened in the Civil War. Confederacy were low on notes, so printed 20 million more. Within 5 months the inflation rate was 5%. That's naughty. 2 years later the inflation rate was at 140. This is hyperinflation. It brings dismay. Inflation rates are usually 2 to 3 each year today. Another type is called cost plus inflation. This is when the business's costs get inflated and customers need to pay more to justify the cost. Petrol stations are an example you've come across. The last cause is demand pull inflation, bro. This is an interesting type of inflation, yo. Increasing customers who want goods or services and supply isn't increasing. How does it work for this? Prices go up. When does this feature figure? More disposable income when peeps are richer. The demand doesn't have the supply to match it. This can happen when governments cut the taxes. Who keeps inflation in check? Who's best to thank? This would be your central bank, like the Federal Reserve or Bank of England. Baby, depends where you are and what's the system, maybe. The main purpose of a central bank is a blessing. Their goal is to prevent recessions. The Reserve has control over the small type banks, so it understands the state of the country's finance. They control using contractionary monetary policy, which forces a reduction in government spending horribly. Specifically, deficit spending is a no, which governments like to boost economic growth. Contractionary monetary policy can also be implemented using open market operations aplenty. The Reserve sells securities in the form of treasury notes. Why would member banks want to be getting them though? When the Reserve sells the securities banks are forced to buy, reducing their capital. It's awful times. They have less to lend out, and if you think it's great, this results in higher interest rates. This all slows economic growth to keep inflation steady. What else can central banks do? Get ready, they can raise the reserve requirement banks need to have. Banks have a requirement for what they must keep in cash. Raising the reserve requirement means an increase in cash in bank reserves because they need the cash. This means less money circulating to be found, mate. The Reserve can also raise its discount rate. This is the amount it charges banks to borrow. See right to meet reserve requirements before closing each night. The Reserve manages inflation for starters by limiting the amount of credit allowed in the market. They do this by using liquidity, yo. Wait, what do you mean by liquidity, bro? Availability of money for investment or spending, really. This makes loans more costly for lending people. However, a key thing for the Reserve is to ensure and manage nobody predicts inflation before it happens. If they did, they would panic buy at the lower prices. This raises the prices and they go into crisis. Demand pull inflation, as we mentioned before. Let's look at hyperinflation, which is 50% or more. Venezuela's inflation rate exceeded 53 million, crikey, between 2016 and 2019. A cup of coffee cost around 2 million Bolivar. Venezuela were loaded with their oil reserves, they were on it large. A labour strike in an oil company in 2003 that would mean much. GDP of Venezuela fell 27% in 3 months. Their currency was rightly just wasted. Zimbabwe also suffered hyperinflation, printing money to pay their soldiers to fight a war. We'd seen countries struggle to manage their inflation before. Why Bitcoin was adopted by El Salvador, printing money. It's just lousy poor. You can't print more Bitcoin, you can't devalue the currency. Value is accurate with the money, see? If it's not clear why hyperinflation is bad for clout, imagine you had 2 million stored in your bank account. Now imagine that in 2 years, an inflation failure. It costs 2 mil for a coffee, like in Venezuela, and the £3 million house you were saving for is now 100 billion you need payment for. Hyperinflation is good if you're in debt. You'd be totally cocky. Instead of owing 2 million, you now just owe a coffee. Was this interesting? Hammer spitting knowledge? If you have an opinion, stick it in the comments. If you have a request, comment that too, and I will make that rap for you. I'm no financial advisor, I'm just nice with the rhymes. It helps the channel if you hit like and subscribe.